Allow me to share one piece of advice that I found when Ansi was asking you questions. That is good qualitative research methodology to ask probing questions or follow-up questions. So irrespective of what your set questions are, when you have issues that you are not clear on, you are allowed, like Ansi did, to probe even further. When you hear that your participant stated something, but there's more to it, then you can ask, what is the more to it, right? So that's good qualitative research methodology, because you are affirming your participants' participation, your participants' views as valid and worthwhile. And you show respect in that way. Okay, so irrespective of what your professors asked you to ask on your set questions, you have the right as the qualitative researcher to probe further. That's on technique. Now, much of what you reflected on can actually be found in literature. In other words, in what other people wrote. Now, there are some names, so I'll do some name dropping here. I'll write down the names for those of you who are inquisitive and curious about these things, for you to follow up on, because you displayed some innate awareness of some of these high concepts written out by some of these people who are paid to think and write. Now, the first concept, very simple one. Recognition. And next to it, I'll put the name Axel Honneth. Now, who is Axel Honneth? He is a director of some group of philosophers and social theorists in Germany, whom we call the Frankfurt School. Right? The concept of critical theory emanated from the Frankfurt School. Now, the concept of recognition in Honneth's work means when you meet with your adversary or with a person who is different to you, for you to make that encounter work, there is that element of recognition of similarity, of sameness. And that is the key to getting things to work between you and someone else who is different to you. Many of you narrated stories about difference, but also about similarities between you and the children that you worked with. So that's one concept. Another concept is the one of communicative action. And we find that in the work of critical theorist and social philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He works in the USA for some time, but he's from German origin. And what does communicative action mean? It means that in communication and in the work that we do in our minds when we communicate with someone else, we create a platform for understanding. That's in the simplest term that I can put it. These people do not write easily understandable English. God, they write in a different form of English that I can't even comprehend sometimes. And you stated it so eloquently, right? So maybe you should start writing the books. Closer to home, to you in America, is Tara Yosso, who gave us the concept of community cultural wealth, which means that people have different forms of capital. And in the USA context, she refers to people of color. Now in South Africa, we are rough people, we even call it black people, or poor people, people in impoverished contexts. We wouldn't use a polite term like people of color. Now Tara Yoso says there are at least 6 forms of capital that people in such communities possess, aside from material capital in the form of money and possessions and shares and what have you. There are something like linguistic capital. Most of the children you spoke to can at least speak English, but they have a mother tongue called Afrikaans. So that's a linguistic capital that I don't know how many Americans have, to be able to speak more than one language, to communicate with people from that country. To write English didn't originate there, you just perverted it. English originated in England. So they are able to communicate with you, right? So that's a form of capital, a form of wealth that they have. Some of you spoke about their aspirations. These children have dreams. Now that's a form of wealth that they possess, because it can carry them whenever things seem so dire and so dark. Some of them use that aspirational capital, some don't. Kevin?
I was just going to, as an anecdote to support what you were saying, one of the little girls, this is what I was putting down, 10 years old, looked at me and said, "How many languages do you speak?" And I said, 1. And I kind of talked a little bit about bits and pieces I could do in others. I said, "How about you?" And she said, 5.
Right.
So the whole idea that we would tend to judge, oh, inferior education, and here's a 10-year-old who has that skill set is truly impressive.
Thanks, Kevin. Now there are 4 other forms which you can read when you Google Tara Yoso's article, Whose Culture Has Capital. Right? Whose Culture Has Capital. That is the name of the title of the article. Whose Culture Has Capital. Then, you also, in your deliberations, went to France. And you evoked the work of people called Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. Maybe even Lacan, maybe even Pierre Bourdieu. But what is the contribution of these French philosophers? They actually, in big philosophical terms, gave us the movements called postmodernism and post-structuralism. Now, what does that mean? What you demonstrated here today is that you didn't, maybe some of you expected to find some truth out there, but most of you went in with an open mind. You do your interviews and you'll find what you get. You don't want to find what you think you will have to find. Now that's postmodernism for you. It states that there is no one truth out there. There are many truths out there. And even when you stand on your soapbox and proclaim that truth, questions can be asked of, all right, is that everyone's truth? So in qualitative research, which you have been involved in the past 2 days, this is a good demeanor to hold, that there is no one truth out there. I am finding some answers, I'm finding some responses, but I cannot have a monopoly over the one truth, over truth, because truth is a contested concept, right? The other concept, post-structuralism, it means that we are breaking borders in this new era of ours. You found so many similarities between yourself and children in an impoverished historically segregated township or neighborhood for children called colored, whom we called colored in the apartheid days. So what is that showing? You are breaking boundaries. What you have, they have. What you know, they know. They may not have an iPad, but they know about iPads. Right? They may not have a BlackBerry, but they know about BlackBerry messaging services, that BBM thing. They may not have a Facebook account, but they know about Facebook. Right? So they know these technologies. Back to Foucault. Foucault actually formed the concept, technologies of the self. Just meaning that our self is the technology. We are not prisoners of our technology. We can use our iPads, but we are not our iPads. We can use our Blackberries, but we are not our Blackberries. Right. And then lastly, the post-colonial literary scholar Edward Said gave us the term discrepant experiences, meaning that we may experience the same phenomenon, but we will narrate it differently. You may have experienced hunger in your house with a fridge full of food. These children also experience hunger in a house with no fridge. Right, so discrepant experiences. And that also brings a nuance to the things that we may think are similar, but this concept brings us back to context. We shouldn't always think of our context as the only one. The simple example of hunger that I showed now, right? You may experience hunger, but you know your hunger will be stilled in the next few minutes with pastries and tea. I don't know if those children has anything else to look forward to today, because today is Saturday. It's not a weekday where they will have a meal at school. Okay. And on that note, someone's metaphor was end of storm. End of the storm, the sun is coming out, and the whole narrative of hope that played out there in front of her. To connect it to what Peter's discomfort was, and the partial answer that Michael gave, maybe this is part of your journey. Just connecting with a strange child in a strange country may ignite a little bit of hope in yourself for your own betterment, for your own improvement. Because great work is being done when we work on ourselves. Thanks. I was getting all kind of messages from this side. Be hard on them. Don't spare them. So, but I have to appreciate what you've presented to us. It shows engagement with the material. It shows a commitment to this research project of yours. Though the findings may not be that surprising, right? The themes that you've uncovered may not have been that surprising, because the South African context is known to have poverty as one of its main impediments to progress. And much of what you found are actually the reality in many similar kinds of neighborhoods. But that's not to say what you've done is not valuable. All right. Now, myself and Ansi, we thought that maybe you can put on other glasses when looking at your same data, those recordings that you have of your interviews. And we suggest that you can think of an appreciative inquiry of your existing data, meaning you look at your data with the aim to sort of look for what are the strengths, what are the strong points, what are the assets that the people you've interviewed display, right? Now that will give you a new set of themes, because what you brought to the table are those negative themes. I heard the word resilience from this lady over here, but she didn't expand on it, she didn't elaborate on it. But those are the kinds of things that you will uncover when you do an appreciative inquiry on your same data. Then, whilst doing that, you will uncover new questions, questions which you have not asked in your initial interviews. And those questions you can just write down, and it will get into the repository of data that myself and Ansi and other researchers will access for our analysis. All right? You don't have to go and pursue the new questions now, so we won't expect you back here after 3 weeks when you have new questions, right? So that's the simple 2 suggestions that we came up with after listening to what you've done. And we are sure, given this display of real hard work that you've given us, that you will be able to do this. And we thought of giving you a little theoretical guidance on how to do it. There's the full title of the article I spoke of earlier. Take it down, please. And that article identifies those 6 forms of capital. There might even be more. But this person has posited this as a theoretical way out of thinking about communities of color in the USA from a deficit standpoint. Now, this may offer you a theoretical point of view of just looking at your participants from a deficit point of view. It's Yosso, Y-O-S-S-O, T-J. And I hope you can make out my scribbles there. It's in the journal Race, Ethnicity and Education, Volume 8, Issue 1. And I spoke about 2 of those capitals already. Kevin gave a nice example of linguistic capital. Aspirational capital I alluded to, just meaning that the aspirations, hopes and dreams that people have can keep them in another headspace, in an environment that is very depressing. So, it says that people in deprived circumstances do not stop dreaming. They do not stop having aspirations for themselves and for future generations, even if they know they don't have the money to pursue that. Familial capital, that's the strength that people can draw from those from their blood relations, or even those who are caregivers who are not blood relations but who live with them as family. And in deprived communities, that's quite a strong form of capital, because you can go to a nephew or a cousin or a niece and you can borrow money even, as much as you can go to that same person and borrow some emotional strength and load off some of your stuff. Social capital, although many of the children in your study indicated feeling unsafe in their own society, in their own community, there are strengths. Like the one girl who mentioned she sings in the church choir. That's a social structure. Churches are not always bad. They're not always good also. But they're not necessarily a bad social structure. And if there are indications of other forms of social activities like sports, from which they can draw some form of wealth to keep them going. Cultural capital, I don't know how much different these children's culture would be from yours, right? Because in America we saw through the television films and the big cinemas these movies about drugs and alcohol and so on. So you're actually world leaders in that, so we took our example from you. That's a joke. So culturally you won't find much difference between what you've seen with those children and against what you have. But you may find that if you look at yourself from a cultural perspective, what gives you strengths, right? They might also think of themselves as what gives me strength here. Their command of the Afrikaans language is a distinct cultural advantage that they have. Being black people who can speak Afrikaans in a town which has maybe many of the Afrikaans millionaires in the country. In other words, the employers. So if you are able to master that language, that form of cultural capital, it can access you some other stuff which a non-command of that language cannot. And I know this gentleman will ask, is linguistic capital not then thought of as something separate from cultural capital? Go and read your books. What are cultural goods? It includes language, it includes religion, it includes sports, it includes other things. So this is not a clear-cut exercise, and it will never be. This is Tara Yosso's idea of unraveling some of these things in real life.
Was linguistic defined more as like your like understanding of the language, and then cultural is how you use that language in context? Is that kind of the difference that he was getting at?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Go back to your books and try and find that out. Because there are also registers of language. So where will we put that? Is it under linguistic capital or under cultural capital? You can speak Afrikaans at a certain street level, but are you able to speak Afrikaans at the level of the prospective employer? Are you able to drop the street credibility when you speak to someone in authority or not? So the picture is not clear-cut, so sorry for that. Navigational capital, that's a form of capital where people seem to operate in a world that was not designed around their needs and wants. Like black people in South Africa, the black children that you worked with. South Africa was not designed around their every need and every want, but still they are able to navigate this country of theirs. They are able to navigate this town of theirs. They may not have all the information about, say, educational institutions of higher learning, right? But they might have an inkling that there is a University of Technology in the neighboring town of Wellington. They might know that there's a University of Stellenbosch a few kilometers down the road, right? And how, when one of them land at such an institution, how will they know how to operate in such an environment? They draw on the navigational capital of those who've been there, or those who were even dropouts but have an idea of how places like universities operate. They may not know the intricacies of investment banking, thank God. Otherwise, South Africa would have been as bankrupt as the USA. But still, they know about loss and assets. They know about income and expenditure, right? So they are able to navigate the banking system of South Africa and the other forms of systems that they need for their sustenance, like receiving money through a cell phone text in South Africa, receiving money through a bank which is not their own bank, and being able to draw money without using a bank card at an automated teller machine. Right? Those are navigational capital. Resistant capital is an interesting one. How many of you thought that those very children that you worked with were actually displaying subtle and overt forms of resistance to your very being there, to your presence? Right, you've experienced that. Now, if you experienced it in the negative, when you do an appreciative inquiry, we ask you to look at it from the other point. What were they protecting when they were resisting your presence? When they were resisting these curious American kids, coming to ask them intimate things about their successes and about their dreams and the things that keep them back and the things that help them to advance. What were they resisting? What were they protecting? Was it a helpful form of resistance? Now, there are other critical race theorists who, Solorzano, who worked on theory of resistance. Solorzano, you can just Google that name and you'll get lots of stuff. One of the things that he co-authored was an article about the different forms of resistance that you get. There's the forms of resistance that get you nowhere. You are just being seen as an angry Hispanic person in the USA. Or you're just seen as an angry, poor white person in South Africa. Right? It gets you nowhere. Then there are the more transformative forms of resistance, which tells the system that you are opposing it, but you are advancing your own progress. You are working towards your own educational improvement, for instance, your own career improvement, and you do it excellently. And you create opportunities for others. So, resistant capital is a very, very important form of capital, though it might not seem like that at first when you experience the resistance from someone in a position of lesser power than yourselves. Okay, so this is what you can find in this article. So if you put on these lenses, you might find different themes in yours, in the very data that you have. This one, I don't know if you find it. It's Sandy Lazarus, is the author. It was written, it's a chapter in a community psychology book that was published here in South Africa, so I don't know if you will find it. But these are values of critical community psychology. And these values are guiding principles when people engage with others in research, in interventions, and just ordinary interactions. So when you engage in research from a critical community psychology perspective, you try to address oppression. In other words, if you're white, if you're rich, if you're from America, if you are perceived as to be rich because you've flown over many waters, many kilometers of waters, you've flown here, so you are perceived as rich. You are in a better position than the child you've interviewed. So what are you doing with that position of power that you have? Right? Are you using it to address oppression, or are you using it to perpetuate oppression? To inculcate in those children the same sense that white still remains all powerful. And if I was white, I would have had better life chances. So when you deliberate or when you analyze your data from this point of view, think of those issues. What did you do with your whiteness? What did you do with your Americanness? Because even black Americans are being regarded as more rich than black South Africans, or more powerful than black South Africans. We listen to the nonsense that you spew when you rap, and we think, hey, hip-hop is the thing. Personal and political empowerment is one of the things that a critical person doing work from a critical community psychology viewpoint also strives to work on. So when you do research, it should lead to some form of personal empowerment for yourself, personal empowerment of the other person, or even political empowerment through information. Because if a person doesn't know how to access the University of Stellenbosch, a few kilometers from from the town that you work in. That's a form of disempowerment. So just the mere information that could be provided to that person can make a change in that person's status of political empowerment. That's just a simple example. Risk prevention and health promotion. There are many risks and there are many issues which create an unhealthy society in that school that you've or in the society of those learners, the neighborhood of those learners that you interviewed. But when you draw up your project as the capstone project for this honors program, if you're guided by this, risk prevention and health promotion, then you'll be on a good track of writing a project proposal that would be passed by Dr. Dean, right? But if you just stay where you are now, just writing up these depressing themes that you found, he will give you all just a pass mark. Okay, yeah, you passed, but none of you would get a distinction. Developing a psychological sense of community, all right. Granted, you cannot develop a psychological sense of community when you've touched and go, right? Amongst yourselves, yes, you are a community of 30 USA students. How did that help you? How does this interaction that we have with you today, the interactions that you have in the evening, on your tours, on your sightseeing, when you have meals together, how does that create a psychological sense of community and how does that help you? And then lastly, cultural relativity. It means that we have to tread carefully when using the word culture, when using the adjective cultural, because it's a loaded concept that has been used to marginalize some in South Africa and to give others a better position. And not just in South Africa, even in your country, in the USA. When you speak English in a particular way, you are seen as culturally inferior to those who speak English in another way. So cultural relativity means that you have to be sensitive to those issues of culture and not just say, it's because the culture is different that these children are so apprehensive of our presence here. Maybe it's just other things. Appreciation for diversity. Diversity is a fact of life. We're not all equally short, not all equally fat, not all equally black, right? So it's a fact of life, and an appreciation for that fact of life will make for an easier going around issues of diversity. So what you may be able to use in your appreciative inquiry, maybe this value, and maybe later on this value, these two, and if you use the cultural inferences that you may have made in your original theme identification, if you re-look at it through a lens of relativity, then you might write a better capstone project proposal. This is what we suggest. Now, you don't know all of it. You know some of it. In fact, you know a little bit of it. But you are serious about the work that you've done. And you are serious about the value that this piece of research can add to your growth and to your academic growth. So we invite you to take these things on board, right? And all of what you will write when Unseen Hour wraps up, even those things would be valuable to us as researchers, would be valuable to you eventually.